Yeah, I'm moderating. So. Do the little Queen's wave.
Ooh, it's quite comfortable, isn't it?
Not a
No, it's not.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining, everyone. It's exciting to see such a packed room. My name is Nick Suri. I lead product at the Wormhole Foundation, and I'll be moderating this panel today on stablecoins, past, present, and future. I'm joined here by three experts in the space, Greg, Ed, and Nick. And maybe if we could just start with a quick round of intros. Maybe who you are, a one-liner on what you're building, and I think you all came from the TradFi world, and so would love to learn how you got into crypto from TradFi.
I'll kick it off. So I'm Greg. I'm one of the co-founders of M0. We build branded stablecoins for other people. That's the easy way of putting it. The more complicated way of saying it is that we are stablecoin infrastructure that sits between issuers and distributors. My one-liner, so I'm the one who came up with the title for the panel. Don't know if you knew that. But yeah, I did come from TradFi just many years ago. So I was a commodity futures trader for some time, and then in 2016 I jumped full-time into crypto. So I'm here for a while now.
Great. I'm Edward. I'm the founder and CEO of ZeroHash. We provide stablecoin and crypto infrastructure to payment groups, including groups like Stripe and Shift4, to brokerage platforms like Interactive Brokers, and increasingly a bigger part of our business is providing tokenization payment rails to groups including Securitize, Republic, and Franklin Templeton. So we will get more into what we do there.
I'm Nick. I'm the CEO of Agora. We offer stablecoins and stablecoin infrastructure, so white label stablecoins as well. I first got into the space in 2016 when I was working for a hedge fund, but spent my whole career as a technology investor, focused primarily on growth stage cloud software. And it was very obvious to me that all of financial services and payments were going to move on-chain in a very similar way to how cloud ate both on-prem software and a lot of human-driven workflows. And we're in inning number one, and that was a bandwagon that I wanted to be on.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're at Digital Asset Summit. We're at Tokenize. I think one thing that a lot of people in our industry are thinking about and talking about is assets coming on-chain, and beyond that, institutions coming on-chain. And each of you is building a key part of this on-chain tokenized world. And so I'd love to hear from each of you on what is the problem that you're solving that traditional finance has not solved, or even what is difficult for traditional finance to solve.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
So, what traditional finance has not solved is it's kind of our reason for existence. So, have you sent a wire transfer recently? Like it's like going to the DMV. It's not a great experience. That's what the original stablecoins really solved. They were able to do international payments very efficiently. Like if you're using USDC, it's so much better than having to go to JP Morgan and write into a form and stuff. But now I think we're evolving into solving a whole new set of problems, which is how do we reorient money flows in the system without having to be intermediated by banks at every step of the way. And I think that's where we're really targeting. And what we're seeing is the evolution from these original stablecoin models, which are very monolithic, into a much more modular stack. So like we happen to sit right in the middle between the issuers and the distributors, but that still leaves a lot of room for other people to be the issuers and be the distributors and be all the supporting infrastructure like Wormhole, who we use for messaging and stuff.
So maybe I'll answer that question, why does stablecoins make sense? So we provide the rails in and out of tokenized assets for our partners. The reason we think it's really, really important, and we've done close to $1 billion on our tokenization payment rails in Q1, which is a massive portion of inbound flows into tokenized assets, is that effectively stablecoins allow for a critical unlock of tokenization to be realized, which is effectively a tokenized asset can be moved 24/7, 365. But the payment rails don't keep up, to your point around wires. So let's kind of take this, a collateral example. If you hold a tokenized money market fund, the other side of that might need cash. If you can't liquidate and move the dollars, that creates issues. So increasingly, the way that we view the crypto and stablecoin landscape is that there's stable coins and then there's stable instruments. And the ability to move between all of them is incredibly important. So that's effectively what we do. We allow for somebody who has a stable coin to move into a stable instrument, such as a tokenized money market fund, and vice versa. And they each have their own benefits, right? So I think stable coins are more programmable. Hopefully, stable instruments will also become more programmable as well. But effectively, what we do is we solve two problems. One is a regulatory challenge and source of funds challenge. You can imagine the sort of diligence that it takes for a group like BlackRock to accept a stablecoin as a funding mechanism for a fund that they've issued. And so we work very closely with Securitize and BlackRock on that. And then the second piece of that is there's increasing abstraction, or there's increasing complexity that needs to be abstracted away. So there's two things I think are going to be true. One, there's only going to be more stable coins. And two, there's only going to be more chains on which those stable coins are built. We've just seen an announcement today for a chain, for example. And so if you are looking to leverage a stable coin in order to access tokenization assets, you want to abstract away that complexity. So that's effectively what we do, which we allow our partners to think in terms of account-to-account transfers, as opposed to thinking about all the chains and all the assets that underlie this and allow for an account-to-account transfer.
Yeah, and I just finish by saying like the demand for stablecoins is driven by the demand for dollars, right? And this is just a much better form of moving that money, right? You can move it 24/7, cross-border for very low costs. And I think where we've gotten, what's gotten us to 200 billion in stables today is primarily crypto trading and a little bit of EM dollar demand. I think over the next 20 to 30 years, you see stablecoins, at least US dollar stablecoins, getting to 15 to 20 trillion. So I think they eat the entire euro dollar market, right? Which is primarily EM demand and just G7, G20, ex-US demand for dollars. It's much better than the correspondent banking system where we were talking about wires. Like wires in the US is much better than cross-border wires where it can take 10 to 20 business days just to receive the money. And so there's real capital efficiency gains from using stables as well as cost savings. Beyond that, I think cross-border payments, FX, continued EM dollar demand, and then the institutionalization of finance on chain are going to be what sort of get us to 15 to 20 trillion from here. I think crypto trading is sort of close to tapped out.
Thanks. Yeah, I think a lot of points touched on, which we'll also revisit later in the discussion. But to focus on one right now is you work, I think, with a lot of major institutions, major financial institutions. So banks, asset managers, other kinds of asset issuers. These institutions have for a while talked about crypto and blockchains. There have been a lot of pilots. There still are a lot of pilots. From where you sit, from the conversations you've had, from your perspective, how serious are these institutions about actually coming on chain? What is stopping them from coming on chain? What will unlock them to actually come on chain?
Well, I think we have to better define which institutions we're talking about. Like what we've seen is asset managers love this tech. So they see this as a new distribution mechanism. It's a way of actually disintermediating the banks from what they do, so they like it. The banks don't like it very much because it takes away this kind of artificial monopoly that they've had for a very long time and causes deposit flight. So I don't think you're going to see commercial banks adopt this technology at large. They might keep saying they will, but yeah, I mean, they don't really stand to benefit from it because right now they're offering you a checking account or a savings account that's paying you 0% interest, and you can get a stable coin that'll probably find a way to pay you much more than that.
Yeah, I'd say there's a spectrum of risk, right? You sort of have prop trading firms, asset managers, and then banks. Banks are going to be the last to adopt this. I have a front seat at an asset manager because my family runs one. And I got into Bitcoin in 2016. They filed for the Bitcoin ETF in 2017. They were the first institutional firm to do so. It took 7 years, right, for that to finally get approved. If you'd asked me to bet all my money in 2017, how long it would take, I said within 3 years, bet all my money, I would have lost all my money, right? So part of the constraints aren't actually like their desire to move quickly. It's the regulators and the environment in which they're able to act, right? I think you're seeing pretty large change in tone from US regulators and the US federal government towards this asset class, which is great. And I think you'll see trading firms and asset managers to continue to move really quickly. But I think this is going to be a very long transition, right? Like talk to friends who are leading some of these initiatives at some of the largest investment banks in the US. They're like, we're still getting through like crypto 101 and like how we even custody these assets. Is Fireblocks safe? What are the threat vectors if we use Fireblocks? And so I think there's a lot of folks that are trying to move aggressively. And you have some early movers. BlackRock is sort of testing the waters with BitL. But it's going to take a long time for the true financial system to come on chain, and I don't think much is going to change over the next 3 to 4 years there.
I would take a slightly different view. I think I think in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 weeks, I've been surprised by, I would say, the step function shift in banks. I think it's largely driven by the removal of sub 121 with effectively a new accounting bulletin of sub 1222. That has fundamentally shifted their view. I think that the administration's view has also changed the approach. I think, at least from my experience and my view, most banks view that the next 18 months is absolutely critical. They view that there's a window in time that they've never quite had before. But I think in terms of the question around the institutions around tokenization, I think you can't unbundle that from where is the value of tokenization, right? So I do think it's helpful to say there's this many assets in the world, and tokenization will eat some of that. But I think that misses the point. I think it's about, okay, which institutions face the biggest issues? And when I think you talk to institutions, they want a very quantifiable number in terms of cost improvements or other pieces. And that's why personally, where I'm most bullish is around tokenized collateral, because that is effectively a very clear cost of capital, right? You can basically say it's the SOFR rate with whatever your credit risk is. And that's very meaningful to people. It's very quantifiable. And so I think the ability to move assets 24/7, 365, I think for me, where I see the most adoption, or where I would like there to be the most adoption, is any entity, such as FX platforms that hold funds globally, but also, for example, clearing houses or clearing brokers, that the way that models work today is basically you build a chart and you say, okay, this is the risk, and we can't move money, so therefore we have to quantify that risk period. That is a weird way of thinking about the world when we now have mechanisms to move money 24/7, 365, including yield-bearing instruments. So for me, I think it's the institutions that face the largest cost of capital that will be unlocked.
Makes sense. And I want to dig more into what you were saying, Greg, about how you think banks might be the last to adopt this technology, how it's maybe competitive to their business. And Ed, you had a different take that you think banks might be coming in the next 18 months is a very, very important period for them. When you think about banks coming on chain or adopting crypto, how is that going to happen? Are they going to use it internally for settlement, or are they going to issue their own tokenized sort of deposits, which is an idea that people have talked about and been thrown around a lot recently? How are they actually going to adopt crypto? Are they going to use more permissionless protocols like M0 or Agora?
I'm going to pass the second half of your question on to them, because frankly, I just don't find the banks that interesting in this capacity. Like, it's competitive, though, to answer the first part of your question, because if you think of the two products, you have let's say they both pay 0% interest. So you're in a checking account paying 0%, you're in a stablecoin paying 0%. One is digitally native, it's able to move anywhere in the world instantaneously. It is better reserved, so it's reserved with only permissible assets under an MTL framework, probably. Whereas the bank deposit is backed by God knows what, can't move anywhere, and is stuck in your little bank's user interface that you probably can't even use. So it's just an objectively better product, and I'll be shocked as these things hit the market if you don't see capital flight out of the banks. But I'll let you guys answer the other half.
Yeah, I think banks are primarily going to use it for settlement. You may see tokenized bank deposits at some point. I don't really think those are as interesting as stablecoins for some of the reasons that Greg mentioned. But it's primarily going to be for cross-border settlement, and also just like internal settlement mechanisms within like their own subsidiaries.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it depends on the banks, right? We homogenize banks as one thing. Citibank is different to JP Morgan in terms of where they make their money. So I think it's going to be, for me, again, going back to my prior point around cost of capital, global movement, there is a perverse incentive structure, because holding large amounts of funds can also generate yield for the bank partner. But I do think that there's a disruptive element here as well, in the sense of, in effect, you can, if you issue a coin, you can earn interest in that for the perpetuity of its use case as opposed to in the walled garden of a bank. So I think that's kind of what shifted in terms of banks' mindsets. But I do think it's going to be the largest FX banks in terms of the pain points that other folks have highlighted. But it's effectively the cost of capital point and the way that moves, I think, is going to be the biggest area of adoption. I do think, though, let's just play this out, right? Let's say that Citi has a coin and JPM has a coin, and each of these coins are built on 10, 15 different blockchains, right? To Dan's point around on-chain means every chain. I think that's effectively how people are viewing the world now, right? We have to be on every chain. But effectively, how do you move that? Because you want JPM and I've got Citi, and I'm on ETH and you're on Sol. So I think the infrastructure pieces around abstracting away that complexity and effectively homogenizing something that's fundamentally not homogenized is really important.
The one other thing I will add is that banks will monetize this, particularly on the FX side, right? Because if you're someone like a Standard Chartered or like another large payment bank, like this is going to actually be very valuable to you in terms of like you're going to need stablecoin providers that are sitting with assets at these banks, so you can monetize that, but also like the on and off ramps as well, right? And so I think it'll be a really good enabler for a lot of these more cross-border focused banks.
Yeah. I think it's going to be the last mile, right? So I think, the Standard Chartered, the people that have the local rails off ramp. So if you actually play this out just visually, what are we talking about with stable coins or stable instruments moving globally? What we're effectively saying is that from one entity, for example, in Nigeria, you can move funds to the US dollar immediately with a USDC or whether it be BIDL. However, this person in Nigeria still wants to receive their local currency, and this person in the US still wants to receive their local currency. So I think that local liquidity pools as well, and that's where DeFi plays a massive role, is effectively creating these global liquidity pools such that you can do the last mile. Because at the end of the day, a lot of people still do not want to receive a tokenized dollar or a tokenized money market fund, but they can be used as this abstracted away piece that has enormous value, but the customer experience is absolutely the same.
Got it, yeah. Shifting away from banks now, I think one thing that you've talked about, Nick, is stablecoins 3.0. Talked about the evolution of stablecoins from Tether to USDC to now protocols like Agora and M0. Can you maybe define a little bit more what you meant by stablecoins 3.0 and what the evolution of stablecoins has been?
Yeah, so very simply, Tether started 10 years ago. They were the original dollars on chain. This, sort of 2.0 was the iteration of this where you had like exchange-backed stables, which leveraged exchanges like Binance, Coinbase's distribution to start to build network effects. But there were many people that were cut out of this equation, primarily every other business, right? That were sitting on USDC, USDT, where they were effectively capturing or stealing the risk-free rate from all of these entities that were driving liquidity and utility to these assets. And so we started Agora with a simple premise of being a much better fiat coin partner to everyone else, right? And that sort of starts with economic sharing. There's a lot of other things on the infrastructure side that we're building to help do this. But whether you were a custodian, a chain ecosystem, a dApp, right? We're going to you and saying, hey, you can either use AUSD and we'll share the majority of the economics back to you that are on your platform, or you can brand us, right, and leverage your own sort of distribution and branding to retain a lot of the economic value derived from having stablecoin assets on your platform. And so I think the demand for that is insatiable. I think Greg would agree. That's a lot of the premise of M0 as well. Is like you have these two, this really duopoly cartel, right, that formed that cut everyone else from the economics, right? And in many ways, they weren't good partners to these businesses. And so there's a large amount of room for new entrants to come in and deliver a much better economic arrangement, but also product experience for the tens and hundreds of thousands of businesses that are going to come on chain.
Yeah, just to expand on that. So we like to think of ourselves as being in the business of complexity abstraction. So you see the people who want to issue stablecoins, they're generally the ones closest to the customer. They're not Circle, they're not Tether. Like Tether and Circle just happen to be really good at issuing stablecoins because they build liquidity and they have network effects. But they're not the ones that are actually distributing that stablecoin to the customer. And those people want to issue stablecoins, but they have too much complexity involved to do it in the old way. So what we do is we abstract all of that away from them into a single asset called M, which is kind of like a wholesale stablecoin. And then they can build around that their own feature set, their own compliance, and everything else that they need at the last mile to deliver. But we abstract all of the nonsense away from them. They don't have to worry about issuance. They don't have to worry about regulation. They don't have to worry about the yield collection, et cetera. We do all of that upstream on the other side of the protocol, so they never have to touch it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the yield discussion is an interesting one. I don't think that's the killer use case, right?
I would agree, by the way.
Yeah, I think, like, everyone look at their account, and you probably could be more efficient with how you sweep your funds into a money market account, right? Like, we just, as humans, are a little, we don't really care about that little
bit
of
lazy.
Interest. Yeah, we're lazy. And so I think the yield-based component, I think, really matters. You know, a lot of the conversation today has focused around effectively an alternative mechanism for transfer of value, right? That's effectively how you can think about the world, or you can think of it as a store of value. And I think yield-bearing instruments make a lot of sense in the store of value construct, which is potentially people like freelancers or people around the world. We, for example, just launched the payouts product with Stripe, and it's being used by groups like remote.com, and we've paid people in close to 50 different countries. When you look at those countries and you look at their FX rates, they're very volatile. So historically, they wouldn't mind, for example, Tether or USDC, because yes, they're giving up maybe 2-3%, but they're saving at 15-20% volatility in their currency. But I think that there's certainly an optimization around a yield-bearing component for that store value lane of the discussion.
Yeah, I think we also view, you know, when people, you know, ask us like, okay, well, you know, we're looking for yield products. So we're like, well, we're not a yield product, right? If you want to buy a tokenized money market fund or Athena or something else, like you should go do that, right? You should come to us for utility, liquidity, and you know, Greg's point, abstracting away a lot of this complexity in the infrastructure, right? But if you want a yield product, you should go buy one, right? And I think people lump together stable coins, and you know, we probably don't have enough time to define exactly, you know, what our own versions of a definition of a stable coin is. But to simplify it, I think about it as like the fixed income market, right? You can have something very simple that is like treasury backed, or you can have something that is way more exotic and you take on more risk, right? I wouldn't really define those products as stable coins. I'd view them as like, you know, dollarized assets. But yeah, it's like people ask, do you compete with Athena? And I'm like, absolutely not, right? Like that's a great product, and like it's very different in the underlying structure. And so if you want something like that, you should buy it, right? But it's very different.
Yeah, and that's a good transition. I want to talk about, you know, there's been this explosion of stablecoins or dollarized assets. There was this Twitter thread that was getting posted a couple weeks ago about USD Ledger or Ledger USD, how there's so many stablecoins. And so when you look at this world where so many stablecoins, you know, is there massive liquidity fragmentation? How are you thinking about competing? And you know, Greg, I think in one of your interviews I watched, you talk about there's the 100 million, hundreds of millions TVL mark, there's the billions of TVL mark, and then there's the juggernauts. How do you graduate into the next level?
Well, I mean, but I don't even think that framework will be useful going forward, unfortunately, because like what we're doing is we're giving that end distributor the ability to have their own branded USD. But I like how you pointed out how there's all these different symbols. I think that's going to go away. Like right now, it's almost like the .com era where everybody needs to slap .com on their corporate name, and that way you know they're part of the internet. So today, everybody's saying, I'm USD this, I'm blank USD, et cetera. That's all just going to collapse into USD. And because that's not the brand is not the important part, it's the control. It's who's managing the stablecoin, who controls how the yield flows in the ecosystem, who controls the compliance. Like to us, that's the much more relevant factor than what it's called. So I think you're going to see all of these tickers go away, and everyone's just going to call it USD. The tickers might exist for the back-end liquidity that we have to manage and say, all right, how do we transfer this one to this one to this one? But the end user will not be exposed to those tickers for very long.
I do think, though, that stablecoins are not homogenous and they're not born equal as well, right? And so I do think it's pertinent to point out that there is credit risk with the issuer, right? And we live in a world that, you know, I remember it was St. Patrick's Day 3 years ago that there was a depeg of USDC. And so I think the onus, putting this construct of an onus on the customer to understand credit risk or differences or nuances, I think it goes back again. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? And for me, it's about programmability of transfer. It's about speed and low cost. And I think if you think about what happens in fragmentation, it drives up costs, right? We aren't going to cross USDC to USDT or infinite A to Z of USD for free. You're not going to bridge them across different chains for free, right? There's a very, very small economic cost there, but it aggregates if you think about the transfers if there's this fragmentation. So I think we have to be careful about fragmentation is good. It can create choice, but frankly, are the customers even aware of the choice that they're making? And then secondly, what does that do in terms of actually undermine the fundamental premise of tokenization, which is it was instant, easy, and low cost? I do think that we may be taking a step backwards, and there's groups like Wormhole and others that hopefully will continue to abstract this away, but we are making a very, very complex mache right now, and they are not equal pieces, for sure.
Can I just clarify one thing? So I'm speaking about this from the M0 point of view, where what our protocol does is it homogenizes the collateralization. So every stablecoin we issue is entirely fungible with every other stablecoin. I agree in that sense, like we can't fragment across issuers.
Yeah, I think you have a power law, right? You probably have 10 to 15 issuers that really matter, and then you have like a bunch of niche assets, right? And some liquidity is going to matter, and others it won't, right? It's like if you're a siloed network, right, and you're offering a dollar asset to your customers, like does interop matter? Maybe not, right? Does liquidity matter? Maybe not, right? But I actually like Greg's analogy to like the .com era. I do think a lot of the tickers go away, and then the only people that really need to know are like the devs or like people that are doing the credit underwriting.
And so when you think about this fragmentation, how do you solve this fragmentation? Is it just something that we're always going to deal with? Maybe everyone builds on top of M0. How do you solve this fragmentation?
So I think M0 and us actually have the similar approach. You have a lot of these, say, longer in the tooth issuers that have been around for a long time, like Paxos, that have decided, okay, every time we issue a new stablecoin, we're going to create a siloed network of liquidity and utility. I think that's a mistake. I think the M0 team and us are taking the same approach where you want to have one asset that you build a monetary network on top of, and that's where a lot of the value accrues. And so I think that's one way where it's saying, okay, we'll go out to a consumer wallet or a perpdex or an exchange or a custodian, and they're saying, okay, we're going to launch, XUSD now for our customers, and it's all built on the USD network, right, or the M network, right? And I think that's how you reduce some of this. Then it's also just like having more competition amongst issuers, right? Tether is very expensive to off-ramp. USDC and Circle have been driving their costs up as well. Like we offer zero fee redemption to fiat, right? So like that should bring costs down for consumers and for enterprises. So I think some of it's done at the issuer level, some of it's doing it at like the product level, and then working hand in hand with some of these guys.
Yeah, I could just say like I know how it shouldn't end up, and I really hope it doesn't, which is how the commercial banking sector looks today. Like if we basically have the same problem these commercial banks had 100 years ago when they were all issuing different non-fungible deposits. Even though maybe they had similar composition, they couldn't be traded interoperably. So we had to make the Fed on top, and now we have this fungibility enforcer that's enforcing thousands of different assets where I just think, if we rebuild that system, why did we even do this? so yeah, I would hope that we take an approach like what myself or Nick are trying to do here, where we end up getting the interoperability at the collateral layer, not downstream at some sort of enforcement level.
Yeah. By the way, USDC's done this a little bit by accident, right? Like DAI backing themselves with USDC is like sort of doing what Greg and I are talking about.
Yeah, I do think it's I mean, obviously, we abstract away the complexity so that BlackRock doesn't need to think about, hey, we need to buy a tiny bit of Ethereum in order to be able to accept a USDC.ETH, and then I don't need to think about, and let's just, a lot of institutions still do not want to actually touch stable instruments or stable coins. And so effectively, what the provider receives, and Dan's diagram showed it, the issuer actually receives dollars. So we abstract away that group. We're effectively an FX provider from USDC into USD. And we abstract away that complexity across, say, 15 different chains as well. I do think, though, that institutions do not view stablecoins as one and the same. And so although we offer many stablecoins, including PYUSD, RLUSD, USDT, USDC, DAI, and others, many institutions will narrow and say we only want to support XYZ by their own determination of what they think is important for an issuer.
Great. Okay, we have 30 seconds left. I want to do a really quick lightning round of questions. I have a couple. So there's been this recent, obviously, administration change in the US. A lot of people are talking about regulation that they want to see come out of the administration over the next 4 years. Real quick, what is a piece of regulation you'd love to see come out of this new administration over the next 4 years?
I want to see the Genius Act pass. I think it's actually a good bill, and I love that it puts encoded bankruptcy protections for consumers into the bill.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the same thing for this conversation. I mean, I think the Stable or Genius Act, when you look at them side by side, they're largely the same. I do think that one has a more, I think the Genius Act, it effectively gives more preemption to the federal government as opposed to the states. So I'm more partial to that there should be competition between both federal and state. But I think that some combination of those two acts is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree, but maybe to add something else, I'd love for there to be a framework for some of these tokens to actually accrue value and drive it back to the users. And so maybe a refresh of some of the security laws.
Last question, lightning question. Can you name one financial institution that's embracing crypto in a way that really excites you?
No.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, look, I would go for Tasty Trade. They launched, they're one of the largest brokerage firms in the US. They launched crypto with us in 2020. They'll be launching stablecoin funding mechanisms. They've launched a crypto wallet. And so I think there you have a multi-billion-dollar firm that is owned by a publicly traded company pushing the boundaries very early on. And I think it's, you need people to go out first, and then other people will follow. And I think that's the group that has certainly done so. And we've seen them be a reference point for other customers.
Yeah, I think it's mainly the asset managers and the brokerages. So I think Fidelity, Franklin Templeton, Van Eck, they're all doing really interesting things.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.